experience, having a penny drop moment, that point in time where you realize why you want to start your business, never happens. It's a gradual progression towards a point where you ask what is next in terms of your career and personal growth. However, there is a penny drop moment in terms of the motivation to start your business. That moment when you realize, hey, I can do this. I experienced one of those moments when I attended a presentation by best-selling author and business coach Sandro Forte. He agreed to appear on Doing Better Business, and this is the first half of that interview with him.
Sandro, what makes one person stand out over another, and how important is this from a business ownership perspective?
Well, that's a very good opening question, Jonathan, I have to say. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to chat with you today. I was saying to you before this started that it's extraordinary the number of times that people kind of preempt outcomes and they think, I'm not going to contact that person, or I'm not going to do this because, and then they imagine a no or a bit of a pushback, or they just can't connect with a particular person. And what's extraordinary is that in my 30 plus years experience in business is that the number of people I've met who've said, oh, I was going to contact you, but I just assumed you'd be busy. And I don't think I've ever said no to somebody who's asked me to do something like this. So first of all, it's great to be with you. I think in answer to your question, gosh, there's lots of things I could cover here. I think the very best way of describing this in terms of creating a USP, and I've written a book that was all about creating a USP. I think that there are several elements to this. First of all, I think you have to develop a really good personality, whether that's the personality of your business or the personality of you as an individual. I think your ability to communicate with others, whether it's in a leadership role, in a sales role, or in any other way in which two human beings communicate. I think that personality and that ability to communicate engender trust and confidence is really, really important. And I think too few people work on that personality skill set. They rely very much on a product or a service. And I think there's not too many businesses I can think of that don't rely heavily on interaction between two human beings. So I think that would be the first thing. I think knowing your subject is very important. Some people call it education. Some people would call it, wisdom or product knowledge. But I think you have to know your stuff. I don't mean you have to be academically brilliantly qualified. I know loads of people who really struggled at school and still made a success of their lives and their businesses. But I think you do have to know your stuff, and I'm sure we'll develop this whole concept as we have a chat today. But I think probably the most important thing, quite apart from being action oriented, and again, I'll expand on that if you wish me to, it's being visible. And especially in the current marketplace, Jonathan, there are always going to be challenges in our world. There are plenty of challenges at the moment, but there are, over the course of my 52 years on this planet, I can think of a dozen, straight off the top of my head, of moments where people were packing up and going home, metaphorically, saying that's the end of the world as we know it. Life will never be the same. And you know what? Life follows a pattern and we recover. And one thing I've learned is that during the times of crisis and challenge and obstacle, the really successful people act in spite of those challenges. In other words, they almost do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. So they become visible when everyone else is hiding. And I think no better example at the moment in my particular business, and as I'm sure in yours, I've actually got on the front foot and I've been communicating with every single one of my clients and contacts at a time when, most other people in an advisory role are hiding under the duvet waiting for the problem to pass. So I think a combination of those different things, you've got to make business easy to do. You've got to make yourself easy to engage with. And I think a lot of people have forgotten or have maybe never even learned the art of creating great relationships. I actually heard, you might recall, Jonathan, at the FPI conference, a really good presentation from a guy called Douglas, and I forget his surname, Kruger. And, he talks about, if you were to name a famous male chef, in the UK, we'd probably immediately think of Gordon Ramsay, or female chef, Nigella Lawson, or airline owner Richard Branson, or a TV interviewer Piers Morgan. Are these the best in their particular field of expertise? Absolutely not. No disrespect to Gordon Ramsay or Nigella Lawson, but they're not the best chefs on the planet, but we know them because they've ticked all these boxes. They've been able to articulate their personality, combine it with good knowledge of their subject, but most of all, they have created a visibility which has made them the go-to people. And if you apply the same principles in business, I genuinely believe you've got something world-class.
I think maybe you've answered a bit of my second question in your first one, where the second question is, what makes some of the world's biggest brands sort of stand out? And I think you might have touched in that in some of the marketability aspect and getting yourself out there. What are some of the other ways in which the world's biggest brands sort of make themselves famous and stand out there?
Yeah, again, a really good question. I'm not going to go over what I've just said because there are some overlaps, but I think the one thing I would maybe add is that, if you go back, let's say 30 years, I'm a 1980s kid, go back to the 1980s, and in the 1980s, if mum or dad or grandparents went shopping, they would be in and out of a dozen shops to fill a shopping bag or basket for the family's provisions for a week. And what was great about that is that you would build relationships with all the individual shop owners, and you kind of like the fact that the butcher was a specialist and the baker was a specialist. And what we've seen happen over the years is that we still want that specialism. We still want that innate knowledge of a particular subject or product, but we just want it to be easier. And that's why things like malls started opening up. We didn't really want to lose the relationship with the butcher and the baker and whoever else it was. We just wanted it to be easier. But what's really interesting in business is that, in my business and your business, I think that in this day and age, people want specialism. They want ease of purchase or relationship or whatever you measure your business by. But I think at the same time, they want to know from a security and a trust perspective that you are a specialist in your area of expertise. If you had a heart condition, you wouldn't go to a GP to be treated. You'd find the very best heart specialist you could. So I think the key is two things. One, stand out as a specialist in your chosen profession. I think the days of generalism have gone, unless of course it's a business that lends itself to generalism, i.e. ease of purchase. But I think also the key, Jonathan, is asking yourself this question: what do you stand for as a business, as an individual? What's your message? And most importantly, where do you add value? Because I defy anyone to convince me that price is more important than value. So what's your value proposition?
I think part of that, defining yourself and what you stand for, brings us to a person having a cutting edge over somebody else. What differentiates you from another person who supplies the same thing that you do in the market? So what are some of your sort of key insights on that?
Well, I can only answer that based on my own business model, but also on some of the other companies I've worked with. I'll give you a specific example of my business. I work in an industry, Jonathan, that is pretty maligned, in fairness. And I think with good reason, if I'm really honest. Over the last sort of 40, 50 years, financial services has been regarded stereotypically as an industry that are traditionally transactional, very much about the advisor, not about the client. And so I think what I did is I built a business that attempted to answer those questions. So instead of focusing on the transaction, we focused on the thing that the client was most focused on, which is this guy going to be around in 10 or 15 years to look after me? Will he sell me a product and then I never see him again? And the only time he ever wants to engage with me is when I've got more to give him or there's a problem. So we inverted a stereotypically defunct model and gave people what they really want. And I think in any walk of life or business, you have to ask yourself, what does my consumer, what does my customer really want? It's not about what I want. It's about serving the needs of my customer. So number one, I would say, build a business on lots of feedback, lots of surveys, lots of marketing research. Understand what it is that people want and build your business around what people want, because what people want, Jonathan, will always be greater than what they need. So I think that's one aspect. The other thing is, and a good example of this is Federal Express. So a business that I haven't got enough time to tell you the full story, but there was an event probably 20 years ago. FedEx were a fairly average parcel carrier at the time. And there was a big breaking story about the fact that FedEx had a delivery driver throw a parcel over a fence in America, and it had been caught on CCTV. And there was a massive to-do about the whole thing. FedEx were heavily criticized for very poor service. And what the CEO of FedEx did at the time was he basically held his hands up and said, we got it wrong. And not many businesses are honest enough to kind of go, you know what, we are, in their words, flawsome. So it's a combination of being really awesome, being world class, but also at the same time understanding that you're not perfect. Too many businesses promote themselves as being fantastic at everything, completely without flaw. And we all know, logically, that's not possible. So sometimes if we get things wrong in our business, which we do, the first thing we do is we don't just satisfy the client, we go way beyond. So it's, you know, a very, very nice gift. It's a donation to charity. And it's a groveling apology, usually with a handwritten note. The little things that make massive differences. If you try and fudge it, if you try and excuse yourself from a situation that you're responsible for, you lose credibility. And this is a world in which I think relationships and trust and confidence in a brand are more important now than ever.
So, I mean, I've been a business owner for about 8 months now. So by no means am I an expert when it comes to business ownership. But in my experience, when business owners are looking at getting this cutting edge, some of them become very ruthless and very brutal. Does it have to be like this, Sandro?
Well, in a word, no, I don't think it does. And look, Jonathan, there are plenty of people, and I won't name names, that have achieved extraordinary things over the years, adopting that kind of, do as I say, not as I do approach. And look, I can't criticize it. At the end of the day, it's successful. My view of that is, and again, I can liken this to my own business. I run a relatively small business. I'm not a worldwide brand by any stretch of the imagination. But whereas those people have made money almost bulldozing their way through life, which I'm not sure is something I would feel very comfortable about, I believe that a great leader is someone who believes in the component parts of a business. In other words, if you create an environment where the team, whether it's one PA or 5,000 employees, if you create an environment where your team are fully committed to the business, I think the component parts working together in harmony create much better outcomes than if you just try to go it alone. So examples in my business, all of my staff, I don't want to give too many people listening too many crazy ideas, but all of my staff get their birthday off. It is, after all, the most important day of the year for them. So if their birthday falls in a weekday, they get the day off. It doesn't form part of their holiday entitlement. If they do something really, really well, they get either a gift voucher to spend on themselves or their family, or maybe a weekend break, or a handwritten note sometimes. It's the little things like that that make a massive, massive difference. So no, I don't think that in order to be successful in business, you have to adopt a take no prisoners approach. I'm not saying it hasn't been successful for people, but going back to what I said earlier, in a world where I think relationships have become much more important, particularly since we're seeing a movement towards social media, distance messaging. The telephone seems to have been forgotten about, and heaven forbid, a face-to-face meeting over a coffee. So I think that if you retain really great relationships with people, staff, customers, and everything in between, I think you can build not just a world-class business, but I think you can build a sustainably world-class business. And that is probably the biggest difference between adopting a take no prisoners approach. Not many businesses that adopt that kind of approach, Jonathan, have been around for the last 50 years. they're normally here today, gone tomorrow in general terms. The ones that have built amazing infrastructure with a very intransient workforce, so stickability, people who've stuck with them for a long time, they tend to be the businesses that have lasted longer and been more successful overall.
One of my interviewees, my previous interviewees, Kobus Klein, very well. And when I asked him about overcoming fear, which is something that every business owner grapples with at some point in time, he made mention about not allowing fear to become paralyzing. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, first of all, I love that man. He's a really, really great guy, one of the best human beings on this planet. So I'm delighted you got the opportunity to speak to Kobus. I think what I would do, Jonathan, if I may, is just change the focus a little bit, because there are two very distinct things to talk about here very briefly. One is fear, which Kobus has already spoken about. And fear, just to be clear that we understand each other, fear is something that you actually physically can see or are dealing with at a given time. So it is a known event. Mm-hmm. And a good example is, there's a spider just about to walk over your foot and you have a terrible fear of spiders. That is fear. On the other hand, what I think we're talking about here for most business owners is anxiety. And there's a massive difference between fear and anxiety. Yeah. So I think what I'd like to focus on, if I may, is anxiety, which is a fear of the unknown. In other words, something that is yet to happen. And I mentioned earlier that it was easy for you prior to contacting me to think, oh, the guy must be too busy. Even if he's not too busy, why would he want to engage in a conversation with me? And over the last 30 years, the best example I can give you of that is my father passed away when I was 9 years old. My stepfather, who joined our family when I was 13, became, my very, very best friend. He was a lovely, lovely man. And when I was 21 and joined the industry, my first job really should have been to have spoken to my stepfather about insurance coverage, because he was the breadwinner of the family. My mum had been declared bankrupt many years before when my father's business was lost after his death. And so it was obvious, logically, it was obvious that I had to have this conversation. But the problem was I was anxious about the outcome. I worried that if I spoke to Dave about insurance, even though I knew he needed it, he would say no to me. He would say, don't have any money. Or at the moment, we might be anxious about the fact that with the stock market all over the place, people won't want to talk to us about investments or financial security. In other words, we preempt an outcome, and that is anxiety. So my answer to your question is, we need to overcome the anxiety, because there's very little you can do about fear. Fear is, you're in the moment, you've got to find a way of dealing with it. But 99% of the problems come from anxiety, Jonathan. And it's an inertia, that inability to act based on what you think will be an outcome. And you know what? We've all got experience of this. Once the job is done, you look back and you think, do you know what? That wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be. Mm. So we have to find a way of acting in spite of that anxiety. And if we master that, then we have a very, very good chance we steal a considerable march on everyone else who sits there thinking about it for far too long.
I think part of that, and if the business owner is anything like me, I like to put a few plans in place and have a look at what those plans are and how they will play out, and then act according to which is the path of least resistance. But part of that sometimes might lead to analysis paralysis, which is also something that can sort of hinder you or block you in a sense and stop you from starting your business or acting in the moment when you should be acting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a good question. And this goes back to what I just said a moment ago, really, which is, I think if you've got really clear goals, which many people haven't, by the way, if you've got really clear vision of where you're going and the steps you need to take to get there, which is the mission in many ways, the question to ask ourselves is what I'm about to do aligned with my goals, my mission, my vision? And if the answer is yes, it makes carrying out an action, a positive action, much easier. If the answer is no, then stop being anxious about it. Stop thinking about it, because if it doesn't fit the goal, the plan, the mission, then it's not even worth worrying about. And that's the problem here, Jonathan, is that very, very few people I know have very clear goals. And when I say clear goals, I mean really, really clear goals. I don't mean waking up on the 1st of January and saying, this year I'm going to be number one in my company, or I'm going to go on a nice holiday, or spend more time with the kids. That's just a wish list. That's just a New Year's resolution. And as we know with New Year's resolutions, you get to the 31st of December every year, haven't achieved your goal, and that little friendly voice on your shoulder just says, don't worry about it, Jonathan, there's always next year. And you spend your entire life just kicking the can down the road. So I think, understand what are your goals, how are you going to get there, what ultimately is the thing you want to achieve, and then ask yourself, is what I'm about to do aligned to those things? If the answer is yes, do it, because you probably know it's going to lead to a great outcome. And if the answer is no, stop worrying about it and move on to something else.
What are some of the key takeaways from this part of the interview? Never preempt an outcome when it comes to contacting clients and potential clients. Develop a good personality and you will create a good, unique selling point. Clients are looking for ease of purchase, but they are also looking for specialization. And you can control anxiety and not let it be paralyzing. Today's inspirational quote comes from celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay, who said, "I have had a lot of success. I have had a lot of failures. So I learned from failure. Put your head down and work hard. Never wait for things to happen. Make them happen for yourself through hard graft and not giving up."